A heavy silence gripped the federal courtroom as Judge Amy Berman Jackson brought her gavel down with a startling crash. The sharp sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls like a gunshot, jolting even the most seasoned court reporters. "Mrs. Bondi, you are in contempt of court," Judge Jackson announced firmly, her tone cutting through the tense atmosphere. "I am ordering the U.S. Marshals to take you into custody immediately." Pamela Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, remained composed at the defense table. Her blonde hair framed a serene face that revealed no trace of alarm despite the judge's stunning pronouncement. As two U.S. Marshals cautiously approached, Bondi raised her hand slightly in a subtle gesture. "Your Honor," Bondi said firmly, her voice unwavering amid the tension thickening in the courtroom. "Before you make a decision you may come to regret, I urge you to review these documents." In that moment, her assistant swiftly stepped forward, placing a sealed folder onto the judge's bench. The room held its breath. All eyes were fixed on Judge Amy Berman Jackson, known for her stern rulings, particularly in politically charged cases, as she locked eyes with Bondi. After a pause, filled with suspicion and curiosity, the judge reluctantly reached for the folder. What followed over the next 10 minutes would not only overturn her initial ruling, but also send shockwaves throughout the judicial system. No one present could have anticipated how quickly the power dynamic in the courtroom would shift, or what revelations Bondi had unearthed that would make even the formidable Judge Jackson step back. But before we reveal the explosive contents of that folder, don't forget to like and subscribe for more real courtroom dramas that shake the foundations of American justice. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, 69, had carved out a reputation for being strict and unyielding. Appointed by President Obama to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, she had overseen some of the most politically sensitive trials of the past decade. Her courtroom presence was both respected and feared. Admirers praised her meticulous adherence to procedure, while critics accused her of bias and undue severity. Today's hearing had been tense from the outset. At its center were serious accusations of prosecutorial misconduct and a prominent political investigation. Pam Bondi was representing a defendant who claimed that key evidence had been intentionally suppressed by the Department of Justice. Bondi, now 58, was no stranger to high-stakes legal warfare. As Florida's first female attorney general, she had taken on everything from healthcare reform to organized crime. But what she presented in court today might be her most consequential move yet. Since leaving public office, Pam Bondi had cultivated a formidable reputation as a defense attorney, particularly in cases centered on alleged government overreach. Renowned for her meticulous preparation and strategic mindset, Bondi never walked into a courtroom without multiple backup plans. On this particular day, the courtroom gallery was filled to capacity, journalists, legal analysts, and curious citizens all sensing that the hearing might make headlines. What they didn't expect was just how explosive the proceedings would become. Tensions flared when Bondi challenged the prosecution's handling of critical evidence. She alleged that exculpatory documents, those potentially favorable to her client, had been intentionally withheld. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, already known for her no-nonsense approach, had issued 2 warnings about Bondi's tone and the gravity of her accusations. Ms. Bondi, these are serious allegations against the prosecution, the judge said, her voice edged with irritation. Unless you can produce concrete evidence to support your claims, I will not permit you to continue in this direction. Bondi, however, remained composed. Your Honor, we have strong reason to believe that exculpatory evidence was deliberately omitted from discovery. If the court will allow me to present our findings, Judge Jackson cut her off. You've made these claims repeatedly, Ms. Bondi, but have yet to offer anything of substance. This courtroom is not a stage for political spectacle or baseless accusations aimed at the Department of Justice. With all due respect, Your Honor, Bondi replied, her voice unwavering, this is not political theater. This is about ensuring justice and protecting the due process rights of my client. At that moment, Judge Jackson's patience wore thin, and the tension in the room became almost palpable. Ms. Bondi, I've heard enough, Judge Jackson declared, her tone stern. Bondi remained unshaken, responding coolly, Your Honor, if seeking the truth is contempt, then perhaps the standard for contempt needs to be re-examined. The courtroom erupted in gasps at her bold remark. It was this final, defiant statement that pushed Judge Jackson to her limit, triggering the contempt ruling and ordering Bondi's immediate detention. Now, as the judge opened the mysterious folder Bondi had presented, the tension in the room escalated. If Bondi was bluffing, her career would be irreparably damaged. But if Judge Jackson disregarded legitimate evidence, the integrity of the entire case, along with her own judicial reputation, could be at risk. The entire courtroom was on edge as Judge Jackson began poring over the documents. Her initial dismissive expression slowly shifted to one of concern with every page she read. Her eyes widened as she examined the first document in the folder. She glanced up at Bondi, who stood confidently by the U.S. Marshals. Her posture relaxed despite the looming threat of detention. "Where did you acquire these documents?" Judge Jackson asked, her voice softer now. "They were provided to us by a whistleblower within the DOJ last night, Your Honor," Bondi responded. "As you can see from the authentication markers and electronic timestamps, they are unaltered internal communications." The lead prosecutor, James Harrington, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we have no knowledge of these alleged documents. The prosecution demands the opportunity to review whatever Ms. Bondi is presenting before the court continues." Judge Jackson raised her hand, silencing him. "You'll have your chance, Mr. Harrington. For now, I am reviewing these materials myself." The atmosphere in the courtroom grew more charged as Judge Jackson continued reading, occasionally jotting down notes. Meanwhile, the prosecutors huddled in whispered conversations, and Bondi's client, charged with obstruction of justice, sat motionless, his gaze fixed intently on the judge. After several tense minutes, Judge Jackson turned to the court reporter. "Let the record reflect that I am reviewing documents presented by defense counsel, which appear to be internal emails and memoranda from the Department of Justice related to evidence in this case," Judge Jackson declared, her voice steady. Harrington quickly rose to his feet. "Your Honor, without knowing the origin of these documents, the prosecution objects to their consideration. They could be fabricated or obtained unlawfully." Judge Jackson shot him a sharp look. "Mr. Harrington, these documents bear the official DOJ watermark and seem to have come from the department's secure internal communication system. Are you suggesting that Ms. Bondi or her team fabricated these DOJ-marked documents?" "No, Your Honor," Harrington stammered. "But then please be seated while I continue my review," the judge interrupted, her tone final. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence once again as Judge Jackson turned her attention to the next batch of documents. Her expression grew darker as she read through them. After a few tense moments, she looked up at Harrington. "Mr. Harrington, these emails appear to show members of your prosecution team discussing the deliberate withholding of certain witness statements from discovery," she said, her voice colder now. "Can you explain this?" Harrington hesitated before responding. "Your Honor, without seeing the specific emails, I cannot comment on their content or context." "Let me read one for you, then," Judge Jackson said, her tone now controlled but icy. She read aloud, "Hammond's testimony contradicts our timeline. If we include it in discovery, the defense will use it to undermine our entire case. Recommend we classify it as non-relevant to discovery requirements." She paused, glancing up. "This email is dated 3 months ago and was copied to your department email, Mr. Harrington." A murmur rippled through the courtroom as all eyes turned to Harrington. Bondi remained silent, letting the damning evidence speak for itself. Harrington stood again, clearly flustered. "Your Honor, if such an email exists, it was merely discussing a legal determination about relevance, not suggesting the improper withholding of evidence." Judge Jackson's gaze sharpened. "Is that so? Then how do you explain this response, which was also copied to you?" "Agreed. File Hammond's statement separately from the main evidence. Market it as internal work product to shield it from discovery requirements." The room fell into a stunned silence. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Jackson continued, her voice cool, "are you familiar with Brady versus Maryland?" "Of course, Your Honor," Harrington replied stiffly. "Then you're aware that the prosecution has a legal obligation to disclose evidence that might exonerate the defendant. These emails suggest a deliberate strategy to circumvent that obligation." The 2 U.S. Marshals, who had approached Bondi earlier, now stood awkwardly at the back of the courtroom, uncertain whether to proceed with the contempt order in light of the damning revelations unfolding before them. Judge Jackson turned to the next document, and her expression shifted, this time, to one of clear shock. She fixed her gaze directly on Harrington. "This document appears to be a sworn statement from Thomas Hammond, a key witness in this case. It directly contradicts the timeline presented in your opening arguments. According to your own filing system number, which is visible on this document, it was in your possession 6 months ago. Yet, it is conspicuously absent from the discovery materials provided to the defense." Harrington opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Jackson cut him off. Even more troubling, Mr. Harrington, is this email from you personally instructing your team to, and I quote, ensure Hammond understands the importance of consistency with our established timeline before his testimony. Would you care to explain what you meant by that? The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers. One of the junior prosecutors at Harrington's table buried his face in his hands. Finally, Bondi spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Your Honor, there are 17 more examples of withheld exculpatory evidence outlined in the remaining documents. In light of what we've uncovered, we move for the immediate dismissal of all charges against my client and request a formal investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. Judge Jackson set the documents down and turned her gaze toward the U.S. Marshals who had been standing near Bondi. Gentlemen, she said with authority, you may return to your stations. The contempt order is rescinded. The room fell into stunned silence as the tension reached its peak. What had started with Bondi facing a contempt charge had now escalated into serious accusations against the prosecution team. Judge Jackson, renowned for her strict adherence to procedure, now found herself at a crossroads. The decision she made next could not only determine the fate of the case, but also define her legacy on the bench. With deliberate care, Judge Jackson removed her reading glasses and set them gently on the bench. The courtroom was utterly still, every eye locked on her as she straightened the papers in Bondi's folder and closed it with quiet finality. The court will take a 30-minute recess, Judge Jackson announced firmly. Mr. Harrington, I expect you and your entire team to remain in the building. Ms. Bondi, you and your client are also required to stay. Court is in recess. The gavel struck with finality as Judge Jackson swiftly rose from her seat and exited through the door behind the bench. The moment she disappeared, the courtroom erupted into a flurry of activity. Whispers filled the air, and journalists rushed to file initial reports on the unfolding drama. Exactly 30 minutes later, Judge Jackson returned, and the courtroom, which had quickly refilled to capacity, buzzed with an air of anticipation. More spectators had crowded the back walls, eager to witness what would happen next. The tension in the room was nearly palpable as she took her seat and surveyed the crowd with a somber expression. Before we address the serious matters before us, she began, her voice commanding attention, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. This court's primary duty is to justice and the rule of law, not to any political agenda, not to any individual, and certainly not to protecting the reputation of any institution, including this court. She shifted her gaze toward Bondi. Ms. Bondi, I owe you an apology. My contempt order was issued hastily, without the proper consideration of the claims you raised. As officers of the court, attorneys have not only the right, but the duty, to zealously advocate for their clients, especially when concerns about procedural fairness arise. A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Judge Jackson, known for her stern demeanor, was not someone typically seen offering public apologies. She continued, however, the way in which you presented these accusations, without prior notice to the court regarding the evidence, created an unnecessarily confrontational situation. In the future, I would expect such serious allegations to be presented through the appropriate channels. Bondi nodded respectfully, accepting the judge's words without comment. Understood, Your Honor. The timing of our receipt of these documents did present unusual circumstances, Bondi said, her tone steady. Judge Jackson then turned her attention to the prosecution table, where Harrington sat, visibly pale and grim, flanked by his team. Mr. Harrington, she began, her voice firm. The documents presented by the defense contain highly troubling evidence of what appears to be deliberate prosecutorial misconduct. The withholding of exculpatory evidence is one of the gravest violations of prosecutorial duty. Harrington rose slowly, his face a mask of tension. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Mr. Harrington. Judge Jackson interrupted sharply. Not yet. Her voice was cold, implacable. I have thoroughly reviewed these documents during the recess and consulted with the Chief Judge. Based on the evidence before me, I am taking the following actions immediately. With a deliberate motion, she held up a document she had prepared during the recess. First, all charges against the defendant are dismissed with prejudice. The defendant closed his eyes briefly, a visible sigh of relief escaping him, while Bondi remained poised and professional, her face betraying no emotion despite the major victory. Second, Judge Jackson continued. I am referring this matter to the Office of Professional Responsibility at the Department of Justice for a full investigation into the conduct of the prosecution team." Harrington's shoulders slumped visibly as the weight of the decision settled in. "Third," Judge Jackson added, "I am ordering an independent review of all cases handled by this prosecution team over the past 5 years to determine if similar misconduct has occurred in other matters." One of the junior prosecutors let out an audible gasp. Judge Jackson, her tone now measured and deliberate, continued, "And finally, I am self-reporting to the Judicial Conduct Committee regarding my handling of this case, including my initial dismissal of the defense's concerns in the contempt order against Ms. Bondi." The shockwave of her announcement rippled through the courtroom. Even Bondi appeared taken aback by the judge's admission. "Your Honor," Bondi said, rising from her seat, "while we appreciate the court's reconsideration, self-reporting seems unnecessary. You corrected the course of this case as soon as the evidence was presented." Judge Jackson shook her head firmly. "Ms. Bondi, the integrity of our judicial system relies on accountability at every level. If I demand it from the prosecution, I must hold myself to the same standard." She then addressed the entire courtroom, her voice resolute. "What we have witnessed today is both a failure and a correction of our system of justice. The failure lies in the apparent misconduct that almost resulted in an unjust prosecution. The correction comes through the diligent efforts of defense counsel and the system's ability, though sometimes delayed, to right its own wrongs." Turning back to Bondi, Judge Jackson added, "Ms. Bondi, this court acknowledges that without your persistence and the evidence you presented, a serious miscarriage of justice might have occurred today. While I don't condone the confrontational approach, I cannot dispute the significance of the outcome." Bondi nodded respectfully in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Your Honor. The defense appreciates the court's reconsideration and decisive action," Bondi said, her voice steady and composed. In a final, unexpected move, Judge Jackson addressed the U.S. Marshals who had been poised to take Bondi into custody earlier. "Gentlemen, thank you for your restraint and professionalism today. Your actions serve as a reminder that, even in the execution of orders, measured judgment is paramount." With that, Judge Jackson brought her gavel down one last time. "This case is dismissed. Court is adjourned." As the courtroom erupted in a flurry of activity, with spectators and journalists rushing to spread the news of the dramatic reversal, Pam Bondi remained calm, methodically gathering her documents. She had entered the courtroom facing the threat of detention, but she left having exposed serious prosecutorial misconduct, secured her client's freedom, and earned the respect of one of the nation's toughest judges. It was a victory not just for her client, but for the core principles of due process and the pursuit of truth, principles Bondi had risked her own freedom to defend. By nightfall, the courthouse drama had captivated the nation, dominating every major news outlet and online platform. Video clips of Judge Jackson rescinding her contempt order and dismissing the case went viral, with Bondi and justice restored trending nationwide. Legal analysts on TV panels dissected each dramatic moment of the hearing. On one major network, a former federal prosecutor weighed in on the event's significance. "What we witnessed today was extraordinary on several levels," he explained. "Judge Jackson is renowned for her no-nonsense approach, and she rarely backs down. For her to not only reverse a contempt order, but to dismiss the entire case and call for an investigation into the prosecution speaks volumes about the gravity of what Bondi uncovered. The political ramifications were equally profound. The case had been seen by many as politically motivated from the outset, and Bondi's victory reinforced growing concerns about the potential weaponization of the justice system. Conservative commentators hailed Bondi's bravery, while even liberal legal scholars recognized the importance of exposing prosecutorial misconduct, regardless of political affiliation. "The system worked today," noted a prominent civil liberties attorney on a cable news panel. "Not at first, but ultimately, and that's the key takeaway. Justice requires vigilance and often, as we saw with Pam Bondi, personal sacrifice." Within 24 hours, the Department of Justice announced the immediate reassignment of James Harrington and the creation of a special review team to investigate the misconduct allegations. The Attorney General issued a statement emphasizing the core values of the justice system. "The integrity of our legal system relies on prosecutors meeting their ethical and legal obligations," the statement read. "Any intentional withholding of exculpatory evidence is unacceptable and contradicts the Department of Justice's values. We take these allegations with the utmost seriousness." For Pam Bondi, the aftermath of the dramatic courtroom events brought both professional recognition and personal reflection. In her first interview after the hearing, she spoke with a measured tone. "This wasn't about me or Judge Jackson," she explained. "It was about ensuring that our justice system works as it's supposed to. When prosecutors suppress evidence, they're not just breaking rules, they're breaking the very trust that our legal system is built on." When asked about the possibility of facing jail time for contempt, Bondi responded, "There are moments in your career when you have to choose between personal comfort and professional integrity. I understood the risk, but I also knew what those documents contained." The whistleblower who provided the crucial documents to Bondi remained anonymous, but their actions had a lasting impact. As more details emerged, it became apparent that the evidence suppression in this case might have been part of a larger pattern. 3 other cases managed by the same prosecution team were soon put under scrutiny, and within a matter of weeks, serious concerns began to emerge regarding how those cases had been handled as well. Staying true to her word, Judge Amy Berman Jackson submitted a self-report to the Judicial Conduct Committee. In an unusual public statement, she explained her actions. "Judges are human, and integrity is not about never making mistakes, but about how we address them once they come to light. The judiciary must hold itself to the same standards it applies to others." The legal community's response to Judge Jackson's self-reporting was overwhelmingly positive. A judicial ethics expert remarked, "Judge Jackson's openness in acknowledging her mistake and subjecting herself to review reflects the kind of judicial accountability our system needs. If anything, this has enhanced her reputation rather than harmed it." 6 weeks after the dramatic hearing, an official review concluded that Judge Jackson had acted appropriately in correcting her initial mistake and recommended no disciplinary action. The review specifically commended her commitment to transparency and accountability, calling it exemplary judicial conduct. Meanwhile, the defendant, now fully exonerated, filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Department of Justice, citing the deliberate misconduct revealed by the evidence Bondi had presented. Legal experts speculated that a settlement was more likely than a lengthy legal battle, which would only expose further flaws within the department. Perhaps the most significant and lasting effect of this case was the momentum it provided for judicial reform. The case sparked renewed debates over the need for stronger oversight of prosecutorial conduct and the challenges defense attorneys face when suspecting misconduct, but finding it difficult to prove. Several members of Congress cited the case in proposing new legislation aimed at tightening Brady disclosure requirements and creating more effective remedies for violations. Law schools across the nation began incorporating the case into their legal ethics curricula, with one professor commenting, "The Bondi-Jackson confrontation perfectly exemplifies both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of our justice system." It's a powerful lesson for future lawyers that ethical courage sometimes requires personal risk. For ordinary Americans who followed the case, it provided an unusual behind-the-scenes look at the workings of the justice system, both in moments of failure and when it corrects itself. Public opinion polls in the months that followed revealed heightened awareness of prosecutorial disclosure obligations and a growing concern about potential abuses of power within the justice system. 1 year after the dramatic courtroom showdown, Pam Bondi and Judge Amy Berman Jackson appeared together at a judicial conference panel titled "Adversaries in Court, Allies for Justice." Their joint appearance symbolized how 2 strong-willed legal professionals, despite their intense courtroom clash, ultimately shared a commitment to the same core principles. Judge Jackson reflected on the courtroom drama during the panel, acknowledging how difficult it had been for all those involved. However, she emphasized that the result, uncovering misconduct, preventing an unjust conviction, and initiating systemic reform, was a triumph of justice in its truest form. Bondi nodded in agreement, adding, "The adversarial system doesn't work despite our differences and conflicts, but often because of them. When everyone fulfills their role with integrity, defense attorneys advocating passionately, judges evaluating impartially, and all parties committed to truth, justice ultimately prevails, even if the path is at times dramatic." The case involving Judge Amy Berman Jackson and Pam Bondi would not only be remembered for its intense courtroom moments, but also for illustrating that in America's justice system, no one is above accountability when truth and evidence lead the way. Thank you for watching this powerful story of justice served. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping accounts of courtroom drama and the ongoing pursuit of truth in our legal system. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Pam Bondi's shoes? We'll see you in our next video.